Sean, I'm going to come to you.
Yeah,
So
let's
get
do
ready.
it.
Is a non-literal interpretation of Genesis a heresy? Okay, before you start, can we break down a couple of these words though?
Yeah.
What do we mean by or you can do it, non-literal. What do we mean by that? And what is a heresy? Can you kind
Yeah.
of break those down and then kind of answer the question?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. And you said this too, but it's such a good question because what the heart you're showing and asking this is you want to believe what's true. It's clear that whoever asked this question, you have a high view of scripture and you want to believe and know what's true, which is huge in following Jesus. Defining terms, which is really important in some of this stuff. So heresy is anything that you believe that if you believe it, it makes you not a follower of Jesus. It would make you not a Christian. All right. And so that's an important thing to understand when asking, is this heretical or is this a heresy? And then non-literal translation. When people talk about non-literal view of Genesis, usually what they're talking about is they think, hey, Adam and Eve, it's just they're representatives. It's just a story, but there wasn't an Adam and Eve that were real, literal people. Or maybe they think, hey, the 7 days in Genesis, those weren't literal days. Maybe it's thousands of years. Maybe it's a gap of time, but it's not actual 7 literal days, like kind of how it's written. So the question here is it heretical or is it a heresy to not believe that literal view of Genesis? So kind of just answer it up front. I would say it's not a heresy to view the beginning of Genesis as not literal, because a heresy, again, is something that makes you not a believer. And what really makes us followers of Jesus and a Christian, it has everything to do with what we believe about Jesus' death and resurrection for us. What makes me a Christian is, do I believe in Jesus' death and resurrection for the forgiveness of my sins? And have I given my life to him, saying, I'm going to forsake living for everything else I lived for and hoped in, and I'm going to trust in him. That's, in the simplest form, makes me a follower of Jesus. What I believe about the timeline of creation, whether Adam and Eve are literal people or not, doesn't impact whether I'm a Christian or my salvation, right? Because Jesus' death and resurrection makes me saved and my faith in it. But I would say this is an important thing, right? It matters. I think it plays into our view of God as creator, his character. I'll just say kind of where I lean in this. I tend to lean towards more of a literal interpretation of Genesis. Some of that being because in the Gospels, Jesus refers to Adam and Eve as literal people. So if I believe that Jesus is God, that he has come to reveal who God is, who he is to the world, and Jesus refers to Adam and Eve as literal people, then I've got a hold of that as well. And so I tend to lean that whole section of scripture is more of a literal 7 days, those kind of things. But this is something we've got to be gracious and open-handed with. There are godly men and women who love Jesus who disagree with me, and that's okay. What is helpful here, and we might say this a lot on this podcast, but the purpose of the writing of Scripture matters a ton in understanding it. So if you think about Genesis 1 and 3, the purpose of it isn't to give us every detail of how the world was created. Okay, so if it was, then we've got to pick apart all of those nitty-gritty details of, hey, this is a literal day or it's 1,000 years or whatever. But I think what the purpose of Genesis 1 through 3 is to tell us who created the world, who God is, who his character, and in connection to that, who we are. So God's purpose in Genesis 1 through 3 isn't this detailed, hey, biologically with like gravity, laws of physics, this is how the world works. It was to say, actually, there is a creator. There's a God that's always existed and he made the world. And so that means all created beings answer to him and owe our lives to him. And so that's really the big understanding that God is trying to get us to get out of that passage. And that has a huge impact on how we view God, how we understand the world. So I think it's just helpful to understand that's really what the purpose is. God isn't trying to get us necessarily caught up in the nitty-gritty details of creation, more so than he wants us to understand that he is a creator, we are his.
Such a great answer. Such a great answer. I love that one too, because I think that sometimes we can just get like stuck in the weeds of all of this stuff. And sometimes we need to say like, no, like what exactly happened with creation it's important. It's
Yeah.
not important. It's important. It's okay to have an opinion on,
Yeah.
but it's not the most important thing. And at the end of the day, what is God teaching us
Yeah.
about himself, about humanity, about him as creator? what is he teaching us? So,
Yeah.
so